Hi there. It's not your fault or mine, but remember, together we can do something about it. Stay tuned.
Voices of humanity, we need to hear your voices. We need to hear your voices.
I like that lady's voice, eh? Voices of humanity. Who is she? I'm just kidding. Warm welcome. Welcome to Voices of Humanity at PR Connections Radio, the voice of new media. Thank you so much. Fueled by Double Consciousness. Double Consciousness has everything, concept put forward by W.E.B. Du Bois, and it has everything with the people that came across, descendants of even the trans-Saharan trade, sub-Saharan trade, colonization, apartheid, all of that. And it has what it means is this: two streams of thought. See the peace sign there? Two streams of thought, two social identities. That gap in between has to do with the struggle. And it's the struggle to become a sense, how maintain or achieve, if you will, for lack of a better word, a sense of self. And how these people look as they come through the time warp, say it was 17th century, 18, 19, 20, 21, 21st century, here we are, how they show up and why they show up, how they show up. So at Double Consciousness, in our trainings, we give people an opportunity to tap into their conscious unawareness, the possibility, probability that they may not be aware of their unawareness in relationship to marginalized peoples and so-called minorities. And that's what it's really all about. We glean from the past, we forge into the 21st century, promoting hope and healing. And the next way we do that is at this podcast, Voices of Humanity at prconnectionsradio.com. Subscribe to the channel. We've got some great people coming up, great content for you, and we would love to represent your voice. Get in touch with me. I would so appreciate it. And tell me what you think. Okay. I have a very special guest here today. Looking forward to this. His name is D.S. Brown, and he's going to tell you all about D.S. Brown, Derek Brown. And I'm going to read just a little bit. Here he comes. Yay! Welcome, Derek.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
I am glad you are here. I've been looking you up. I've been looking you up. You're doing all sorts of things out there. In fact, just this morning, I was listening to, where was it? What platform was it on? Wisdom Platform. And it was a brief message on critical thinking. Okay. All right. I started thinking critically. Okay. I started like, okay. And I loved it. I'm going to read a little bit about your about your bio and what you got, your expertise. Here we go. All right. Derek is a thinker, writer, an innovator, a technologist, and creative. He utilizes critical thinking skills in order to analyze and assess individual and team dynamics for improvement and strong positive outcomes. This same skill set is utilized as a powerful problem solving tool. I'm a strong leader, able to influence for success across any organization at all levels. I'm the developer, of the tool for motivational empowerment 3FE. That's 3 F's and an E. And very interesting. So we'll get into that. Focus, establish the fundamentals, execute. So that's find, focus, establish the fundamentals, and execute. So that is 3FE3, capital F, capital E, 3FE. Fascinating. The everyday person's critical thinking tool for problem solving that enhances, motivates, and empowers the individual. I love to put words to that, Derek, because I always like to take a bird's eye view and almost debunk what I think I know. Is it kind of like that? Kind of go right. So I just love this, and I'm going to read. And finally, and there's a lot more in there. Okay, before finally, I am an author with a passion for the written word and a true Southern gentleman. Ooh. For me, writing is a passion. I've written over 11 books covering everything from African superheroes. I saw that to critical thinking and President Obama to Atlanta's classics, Seminole Citywide Collegiate Spring Break break, bacchanal, freaknik. Okay, I don't know what that is, but it's all it's all good. His teaching experience, training. His trainer teaching associates how to use new applications, facilitator leading sessions on leadership, critical thinking, brand building, team building, diversity, equity, and inclusion, organizational competency, motivational speaker, developer of 3FE, which we mentioned before, the tool for motivational empowerment. We want to know about that tool. Fields of expertise, diversity, equity, and inclusion, lots here in the expertise area. Um, Organizational relationship competency, fabulous stuff. Welcome again, Derek. This is good. And I really want to offer our listeners a lot today. And clearly, you can see that he's a black man, right? I know. Excuse the bywords. We're actually all brown. I don't know. Brown refers to another group, but here we are.
Absolutely.
For all intents and purposes. Welcome, Derek. So we want to know, how did you get so great? What happened to you?
Well, and it's funny, right? When I think about it and you read through it, it does make you feel a certain kind of way.
Mhm.
Great is not an appellation that you apply to yourself, and
I know.
it's just the fact is you do things, you get passionate about things, and before you know it, you come upon a certain time and turn around, and you're like, where'd all that stuff come from? And
Right?
that's essentially what happens. Sometimes my wife, she'll tell me, does that stuff stop? And I tell her no, and she's like, because my mind is always running, right? It's always
Right.
running. I keep a brainstorm file of ideas. I've done that since I was a child, and I love to write, as you noted, and I
Mhm.
love to problem solve, and I love people. So all of those things just kind of came together in my head, and what you're looking at there, Sandra, is the output.
I think
It's
it's
the output.
fabulous. I was going to get into this book. I've just read the little part of it, D.S. Brown, Why I Voted for President Barack Hussein Obama the
Oh,
second. I thought, well, and and when you read it, it's not just about people agreeing with you, but it's your conviction about and how you put it into words. And I love it. Now I want
thank
to talk
you.
about the black man, brown man, black man. All right. While you're doing all of this, clearly to me, this comes through. People don't just wake up and start, as much as people think, I'd like to be like that. And if you hear his podcast, right? Hey, woo. And so I saw a couple of the videos. There was one about the etching the edges and that whole thing. Okay, so where do we go first? Now, first I wanted to know about the man that's doing all the work, and then we're going to get to the work. Is that okay?
Absolutely.
In terms of, you're from like one of the the 7 states that are heavy in terms of racism, if we're talking about that, okay, and what that really looks like, and what Georgia had some what was it, some cleansing, some racial cleansing in early 1900s, a heavy deal. And I was thinking, as a man growing up, now this is Canada, this is different. I not
Mhm.
see racism when till I start to feel internally oppressed, because they'll get you with the language and semantics, but it can be very overt in those states. So
Absolutely.
how did
Absolutely.
that affect you growing up? What did mommy do? How did you guys navigate that?
So this is going to be interesting, and I want to make sure that I lean into discomfort as I describe my experience. Right, the state
Yes.
Sandra's talking about is Georgia,
Yes.
and
Yes.
I've lived here all my life. I love Georgia. I love my country. I love the South. And so a lot of American Africans, and I'll dissect that a little later, grew up the same way I did as a child of the 70s and the 80s. So,
Mm,
what does that mean? That means that when we talk about all of the racism and the pain that people
mm,
talk about, it's there, but a lot of us didn't necessarily experience it that way.
right.
We talk about the talk. I'm one of the folks that I can tell you my parents never gave me the talk.
Hmm.
And I talk about that in my latest writing, my latest book. And some folks say, you didn't get to talk? I was like, no, I grew up on Officer Friendly. You can
Hmm.
Google Officer Friendly, and there's probably like two statements out there around this program back in the day
Hmm.
where kids were taught that the cop is a good guy and he's there to support you. And of course, when I first saw that, that was way before I had any visibility into what happened in the 60s, or that when my mom and dad drove me by Dr. King's home over on Auburn Avenue, that there was this extensive past that they lived through. I was 6, 7, 8. But And there were times, right, as we moved from Martin Luther King Jr. Drive, which was a black enclave, to Southwest Atlanta, which was another black enclave that was on the edge of what was mostly, white neighborhoods.
Ah,
There were,
okay.
there were some encounters, but they still weren't as heinous as some might presuppose. And I'll be quite honest, I really let me say it like this. I didn't get called a nigger by a white man until I was almost an adult.
I think I was around 12. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I was so shocked. I
Yeah.
filed it. Oh,
Now again, Atlanta, folks see this as a black city,
yeah.
so to speak, American African city, African American city, whatever you want to call yourself, a brown city. Um, I got called a nigga by a person of color before I was ever called a nigga by a
Right,
white
right.
man. And that was just a part and parcel of life. We lived quite nicely here
Hmm.
in the middle of the South, but the stories would come through the news. I lived through the Atlanta missing and murdered children, and
Mm,
they said a black
yes.
man committed those crimes,
Hmm.
and he was convicted of it, and not even all of them. Most of them were unsolved. But I don't know, Sandra. It's kind of funny. Sometimes I look back on my childhood, and it was idyllic, and I think that parents and community built that. Parents and
Mm,
community in the South built that, and a lot of us will raise the same way.
yeah.
The guy that was two classes ahead of me became mayor of Atlanta, Kasim Reed. Right? You've got folks that grew up on the South side of Atlanta that become part of the city council.
Yeah.
They success does live here, but it is surrounded by what you talk about, which is most heinous. And we see that come out more often than not, unfortunately. And to put a capstone on that piece, as I moved to Gwinnett County on the north side of the metro area, some
Hmm.
50 miles from where I grew up on the other side of town, which was in our county, which now to me is perhaps the most diverse county in this country. I can argue that, I think. And it's a great place to live. And I think it's endemic of what could be best in the American experience, the ideal of what this nation should be. It was here, I think, 2001, where I was jogging around a local mall trying to get my exercise in. And a guy pulled up to me in a pickup truck and told me to go back to Africa. And then he dropped another N bomb on me. And
Yes. Yeah.
that that was real. And
Mm,
you take pause because you're like, well, I'm from here. I
yeah.
can't go back to Africa, don't you understand? Any more than you can. You look at
Right.
the two of us, your skin is tallow and tan because you're not actually white. I got a Crayola crayon that's white, and you don't look like that. And
Yes.
I'm a man of color, I'm American African, African American, black, whatever you call it, but I
Yes.
don't look like a Crayola crayon either. As a matter of fact, black is the color you're wearing on your sweater there. Neither one
Mm,
of us look like that, or that chair you're sitting in. But either way, I can't go back to those places because I'm not from those. I can
absolutely.
visit them.
Absolutely. I find that fascinating that in Georgia, because people would think, right, you're going to be
Yeah,
getting all kinds of racist comments and you're going to, and what foresight? I don't know. Do black people live in foresight?
it's funny. Forsyth has a reputation. For this is Gwinnett, this is Forsyth,
Yeah.
right north of where I stay. And it's funny because you've got that so-called thing called white flight, and folks flee.
Mm.
And now, if you flee, you will run right into me. And you find it fascinatingly amusing. There's a large Indian American population up there. There are Asian Americans, so to speak, right? Asians of different ethnicities,
Hmm.
and black folks are there too. And all of a sudden now you're seeing a rising shift in demographics, and there's a Democratic Party that's
Right.
active in the same space. So to me, it comes back to, hopefully, as these changes evolve, especially in these southern states where folks are moving back to, people of color are coming back,
Mm,
the great
yes.
migration is shifting and folks are moving here. We can
Mm,
get ourselves to that point of discomfort and ask the real critical questions like,
absolutely.
what you run into, and why?
Mm. It's funny because here, about 5 years ago, I started doing this work, and I'll tell you, I didn't realize how much deep rooted stuff I had until I bumped into W.E.B. Du Bois' concept of double consciousness just by looking things up, looking for myself, I guess. And a lady out here, sociologist, Dr. Joy DeGruy, and she's doing this work, right? So I was on watching her video and she was talking about post traumatic slave syndrome. And I'll tell you, I had to put that thing on pause going
Mm.
ball. I had a moment of, I'm telling you, they're like, I went back through the time warp and back 21st century, 20, 19, 18, 17, because we show up here in the 21st century. I'm finding, because these are part of the trainings we do, that people show up in the 21st century and we were taught, see, you had a wonderful experience. We were taught sort of to pull up everything by your bootstraps. It's meritocracy. Don't worry, don't look back there. Shh, don't talk about it. But here we are in the 21st century and we're showing up a certain way. And a lot of people think that they are less than, right? And when you look back into the time warp and see what we brought home, and we got whites, excuse the bywords, whites and blacks, we came through it together. Now, one had a serious case of post traumatic slave syndrome. The other one had some cognitive dissonance, having to
Mm.
reconcile with the fact that great great granddaddy and grandmommy had anything to do with dehumanizing, villainizing, dismembering,
Yes.
hanging these precious people. So this is challenging. And when I realized how much I had filed, a friend of mine, we were watching a movie one time, and I don't know if you ever saw, what's it called? Ghost. The one
Yes.
with Patrick Swayze, Whoopi
Yes.
Goldberg, and I tell this story to people all the time. And here, Patrick Swayze died, and it was Demi Moore. He was Patrick Swayze and Demi Moore married. So Whoopi Goldberg is sort of anyway. He enters Whoopi Goldberg so he can make contact with his wife. So his spirit's in Whoopi Goldberg, and here is Demi Moore's hand here, Whoopi's hand here, and there's this,
Hmm.
going on. You got this white hand, you got this black hand, and I'm watching this with a friend, a white man, and all of a sudden that scene comes on, white hand, black hand on the white hand, and so he just points at the TV, and he says, "I hate that." Knowing this guy for so long, we were so close. I hate that, and I went, "Ooh." In your mind, I'm thinking, should I use the R card? Starts in an R, ends in an E. What is this? Because you're not supposed to use that card, that race card, and if you use it, you're supposed to have a little shame attached to it.
Hmm.
So I'm hearing this. So I said, "What are you talking about?" And he said, "That, the black hand on the white hand," viscerally. I didn't know
Wow.
what to do with that. I had no idea. And I used to sing a lot too. And I'd go to places, and a couple of places here in Ontario. And people, this one place, this woman looked at me. She said, I said, "I'm singing here. Someone booked it for me." And she looked at me. She said, "No, I don't think so." Well, I walked in with these, and
Oh,
and
okay.
I say to people, if I call you right now, and you call me, and I pick up the phone and I say, "Hi, how are you? Oh, this is great. Yes, thank you. Do you have the package? I look forward to meeting you too." Right? But if you call me and I answer and I'm like, "Man, yes, you got the package? Everything all right? Okay, I gotta talk to you." You might assume the first voice is white.
That's right.
The
That's
second voice, you
right.
might think it's Caribbean. And there's a lot of this sort of implicit stuff. That lady looked at me that day. I never did sing there. She had to check and get back to me. And then the
Wow.
friend that was with me, that was white, sat down in front of me because I was very emotional. I thought I looked nice. And so she sat down, and my friend said, "Oh my God, I think they're prejudiced." And it was hard. There's story after story here.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that is incredible when you think of that implicit stuff that we brought home with us because we were taught
Yeah.
that it was passed on, and then you pass it to your children unintentionally. So yeah, I was just curious to see how that affected you
Oh
and your
yeah.
family.
It,
Mhm.
it, it socializes. It forms foundation,
Right.
and then at the same time, it's a dichotomic thing because it cracks the foundation too. You're born
Mm.
and bred in it, but we also export it as a nation.
Yes.
My wife is a teacher, and it's fascinating for her to come back and talk about the story. She teaches at the most diverse high school in the county. It's like, I think, 38% Hispanic, 33% African American, and then you've got Asian, and then you've got European American. And
Mm.
the conversations and the challenges all cross these divides, and the biases, they wash their way through the hallways, and they have to
Mm.
talk their way through them. A quick anecdote around how I think of these things is I raised my daughter here in
Yes.
North Gwinnett, to be proud
Mm.
who she is. And, and of course, there are these things that I didn't think she'd run into because it's 2017 and 2018. And
Hello.
I'm teaching her to be proud of her hair, and go ahead and rock that afro, girl, and whatnot. And,
Great.
and I'm not, in my home, there in our library, we have a library instead of a living room because a living room has no basis or purpose to us. And we put books in there instead. And there are images of people of color and things of which you can be proud. And we try and get her to view these things on the screen and what we watch, and we speak pride. So you got to know, Sandra, I was fascinated and shell shocked when she came home talking about down hair and how down hair is pretty. And I'm looking at my wife like, what the hell is
Oh.
down hair? And
Please tell me, what is
straight
it?
hair. Straight
I got
hair
you.
that's been relaxed. And
Okay.
I went,
Okay.
what? What? When I've got these Ebony magazines over here, and how did it happen?
Wow.
Socialization, exposure, and even though we live in a diverse community, it's still to some degree there's the overarching American experience
Yeah.
and what that's supposed to look like, as opposed to what's ideal, holds sway, and it socialized my child. So she goes to the North Gwinnett Middle School and experiences some bias and racism and white kids wanting to call themselves nigger and things like that.
I know. I
And other
know.
kids who are saying, well, don't you think it's kind of funny that perhaps you should have been my slave? You see, and I'm hearing this and I got to go up the street now and strangle somebody.
Yeah. Yeah. I know.
Because this is not what I expect out of education. But the
Yes.
shifting, of course, and I didn't strangle anyone. You didn't see me on the news.
He did not.
I
Okay.
did not. And it was great to see that the teachers really were, in a lot of them freely admitted, they struggle with bias and they're struggling to understand it, which makes them, at least in that regard, how you relate to a child of color, deficient. And those are things that have to be addressed. And I love it
Absolutely.
when my white
Absolutely.
colleagues and friends say, we get it, Derek. This is our responsibility.
Oh, see, I
This
love
is
it.
what we have
Yes.
to be accountable for.
Yes.
And I love it. And I'm like, so and it's happening, it's changing. And I think it needs to happen in a place in a state like Georgia, where we've
Wow.
got an outsized reputation and there's still things happening that you get to see magnified on the news. But the result where it comes down and lands correctly for me is when my child takes on the opportunity to say, Daddy, I don't want to go to the high school up the street, which has all of these accolades and whatnot and a ton of money to go with it. She wants to go with my wife to where she teaches at that school that's the most diverse in the state. That's a Title I school that
Okay.
also has all kind of extra programs to
Yes.
go with
Yes.
it that are
Yes.
centered around DE&I. These
Mm.
things that are trying to get kids of different backgrounds to better come together. She's thriving. She's
Oh, I'm
thriving.
so
And
glad.
she's rocking a big ass afro.
Oh, thank you for the
And,
afro.
and I could not be more proud. Let me tell you, a
This
straight A,
is
athlete
fabulous.
getting, Afro rocking child that is trying to get politically engaged in county politics at 14 and is already a leader, in my opinion, beyond anything that I might have imagined. Is quick to sit down and talk to me about the inequities of the American socioeconomic experience,
Mm.
using those words herself, and recognizing that even though we take 4 steps forward, get knocked back 4 sometimes, it's always forward. It's
Oh,
always forward. And
love it.
this
Love
is
it.
my child. This is the experience, and we're still dealing with things, Sandra. Right? But
I'm proud of her for that afro. This is
yes,
okay, Derek. You got to hook me up with some young people. I need to get some youth up in here. This is serious business. I need to get some young people up in here talking. I remember Dr. Francis Cress Welsing said something. I know you. I have to book you right after this show again because look at the time. Okay, and I got a whole
yeah.
heap of Dr. Frances Cress Welsing, she said something once. I turned her off for months. This is when I was sleeping. So she said, fill your life with color. She said to our people, black people, go home, take down all the stuff off that belongs to the other. And I've got a lot of other in my family. We're all mixed up with stuff in our family. So
Yes.
we're not coming and doing a reverse racism, which there's no such a thing, but that's another show. But when she said go home and take the stuff off your wall and put up fill your life with color, because and then I turned her off. I was like, oh, what is that? Racism, reverse racism. And then I woke up a little bit to things, and I went and I'm back, and I just love Dr. Frances Cress. And I'll tell you, she said, and I listened to the end of what she was saying, got my critical thinking on. And she said, because we've had so much of the other. You're disconnected from who you are. Every other group
Right.
owns themselves.
That's right.
So, and they told you it's just by meritocracy. No, heal yourself and close that disconnect. 21, 20, 19, 18, 7. Go back and look at what you didn't want to look at. You'll come back here free as a bird. But she was saying, if you could just fill your life with color so you identify, get a hold of this, love it, hug it,
Love it.
um, it's,
Love it.
I think it's a magnificent thing, and it changed my life, that listening to that woman and understanding who I was as a woman, as a Black woman. But I got to get somewhere with you today, and I'm just glad we could have this talk, because we could sit here and do a lot of this, and for
Yes,
an
yes,
hour will be
yes.
gone. But Lord, let me just plug in this thing. Have mercy. This is real time. It looks like my thing's running out. But what I really wanted to know about was, I really wanted you to talk a little bit about critical thinking. It just moved
Absolutely.
me. I never heard it
Yes.
like that before. And what's his name? Colonel, what's his name? He does a lot. Colonel West. He talks a bit about that,
Yes, yes,
right?
yes. It was funny because Cornel West came to the University of Georgia. I can't
Oh, did
remember the
he?
year, and he spoke, and he inspired me.
Yeah.
And it was also fascinating to hear him as he expounded from the stage. A friend and I was standing in the back, and she and I looked at each other and laughed, because you could see that, as you know, Cornel West's vocabulary. He's a doctor, Doctor Cornel West.
Clearly.
Is the way he speaks and how he says it, powerful, right? And he speaks in a Black tradition,
Yes.
connecting and using words that are extensive and deep. And we were looking around the crowd, and you could tell that some folks' eyes were starting to boil over, like their brains were starting to explode a little bit as he
Yes.
was sharing the Black experience from an intellectual perspective. And it was powerfully motivating. And I just think that part of that inspired me to continue my intellectual curiosity. I'm by no means what I consider an intellectual giant. Now, there's no doctor in front of my name, but I'm curious.
Yes.
And, and
Yes.
I like to read and I like to write. And my critical thinking approach came from me doing a bit of study, reading some books, and, being inspired by people like Dr. West. And I said, well, you know what? From an academic standpoint, I get that, but that's not really what we need. That's not the salve, or, the balm that's going to take care of us, right? We
Yes.
need everyday critical thinking. We need to teach
Mm-hmm.
regular folks to stop. First, stop,
Yes.
then think. Take a beat. Even in
Yes.
the heat of emotion, can you stop and take a beat? If we would do that more often than not, a lot of the bad things that occur would not. Now,
Absolutely.
first you stop and think, and then you say, if I'm going to discern and ask a critical question about what's happening to me, next to me, around me, why it's happening, and what can I do about it, now I'm applying the Socratic method, which is indicative
Mm.
of a critical thinker's approach. And, in my book, the critical success, the two rules of three, I break down the two rules, and the first one is 3FE: find, focus, establish the fundamentals, and execute.
Yeah.
It's the everyday person's tool for critical thinking, because you go back to third grade, is the way I like to say it. And I do this in my corporate work as a problem solver. I share this with executives. I do it in rooms of high intellectuals who seem to be spending 45 minutes talking about what we're going to do without fully understanding what we're going to do,
Mm-hmm.
because everyone is scared to say in front of everybody else,
Mm.
this is what we're doing. So instead, we keep talking and solutioning until someone has the courage to stop and think and ask, okay, what are we really doing? The third grade questions are the same ones you used to use when your teacher asked you to write an essay about an article: what, when, where, how, and why.
Yes.
That's the
Yes.
true heart of critical thinking. And it goes back to that Socratic method that I mentioned. Ask questions. Ask questions and give yourself those simplistic answers. 3FE breaks this process down. You're in the find phase. You start to ask questions about whatever the problem is. What is it? Why is it? Who is it happening to? When is it occurring? And where is it going to occur? Get those data points. Just ask those questions. Pen and paper, always simplistic. Keyboard if you like it, but you don't need a special tool beyond your brain, your pen, and your paper. And write it down.
Mm.
And data that comes together and you focus on it, you start to realize that things have alignment. They relate. And when data comes together and aggregates, it has value, and that's called information. And
So what
when
does the
you
find do? What does the find do in 3FE? That's the three one of
find
the
is just you asking those questions.
okay.
If you
Okay.
have a problem out there, what is it specifically? Literally write it down,
Okay.
define the problem.
Yes.
More often than not, we find in everyday action and living, that's not what people do. We jump to execution. And usually that ends in
Mm,
reaction, you see. And then
yes.
that often turns into an apology. Why? Because you did the wrong thing or you
Yes.
said the wrong thing.
No, that's true. Because I don't know how many times, I just or you say it and then you're thinking, wait a minute, I didn't look at life from both sides now. I
Yeah.
didn't I didn't
And
look at it.
this is critical, Sandra. You gotta, and I remind people all the time, even, separate from the tool itself, if you want to engage in critical thinking, you always have to embrace the hallmark of the critical thinker. And that's going to require you to take the time to stop and think and internalize the perspectives of others.
Okay.
Internalize and feel their perspectives, most especially when that perspective is diametrically or violently opposed to your own. Said another way, walk a
Mm,
mile in someone else's shoes. Literally try that. But
mhm.
flip the script on it and don't get mad first out the gate. You can feel passionate, but then you got to stop and say, now, why in the world is she thinking that?
Mhm.
Because that's the first pick. Why? Now go to well, what is she thinking? What is
Wow.
she thinking?
Yeah,
And then
yeah.
try and dissect that a little bit. Ask those questions of yourself from her perspective. Then
Mm,
perhaps, and if you're diligent about it and you continue to listen, because again, we're mostly reactionary as human beings, we tend to talk a lot more than we listen.
yes.
Maybe you
Yes.
can come to a common ground of understanding, and the good things happen in the common. In the crucible of positive conflict, good solutions are divined. But we tend to spend way too much time being negative, and that's when things break down. It really is as simple as that.
You know, it's funny you're talking about I was in a training just the other day doing this double consciousness thing. And I showed a 5-minute clip of, I don't know if you remember that show, A Time to Kill, the movie.
Yes.
Matthew I always say it wrong. Sandra Bullock, and what's our brother's name? Shame on me. Ah,
It's
I forgot a name.
Samuel L. Jackson.
Sam. Okay. So of course there's that scene, the closing arguments of this big court case scene,
Hmm.
because they've raped this black girl, a little girl, to the point of mutilation. All right, and they pick her up, start using her as target practice, and they were throwing beer ball cans at her, and to the bone. Her skin was like okay, and
Hmm.
then they hung her. Now that didn't work because the branch broke, and they took her and they threw her up into a lake. And so father went off, okay, and decided
Hmm.
to take somebody out. And I thought, and the only way that he would have gotten off, so the lawyer, Matthew, is doing this closing argument. And I started to think to myself, and in our training, people, so at the end, so he said, you see what they did to her? You see that they raped her? Do you see her? Do you see her? And then he said, now picture her white. And in my training, people said, "Oh my God," white people, and they said, "Wait a minute, you mean we have to picture her right? That's awful." Wait, and part of me, I just said, maybe, you know,
Yeah.
maybe you have to go there in
Yeah.
order to really critically, really look that could be you, that could be your child. That's what he's trying to say to you.
It's unotherizing. It's
Eh?
unotherizing. And when
Mm,
you unotherize that,
unotherizing. Love
and
that.
see that perspective,
Yes.
then those emotional buttons inside, they get
Mm.
pressed. Those switches start to tick. And
Hey.
the fact that you were dehumanizing, because again, also that's an essential function of socialization in terms of humanity. You're
Absolutely.
not a little white girl, so I get it. And I'm gonna say it real. It's like you were watching a dog get killed, and that's
Yes.
sad and
Absolutely.
whatnot, but it wasn't a little white girl.
Absolutely. Oh,
Unotherized and inject
on
the image of a
otherizing.
young white girl in there, and all of a sudden things tend to feel and look differently, and we need to do that.
It really did. There was a pause, and it kind of shifted me sort of in these learnings, trainings to just not me, to the we and the our. Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay. It's time to
Exactly.
roll up sleeves since we're fed up with it and we're all speaking, white people speaking in white spaces. It's time to do something a little different here, you know? And I'm thinking about the way, so I said to, the way that we've looked at each other for a long time, founding fathers, Jefferson, one of their things was we're orangutans, we're monkeys, we can't feel. We had human zoos. John McGee started these, perpetuated these. And then there was the Bronx Zoo. They had our people in zoos. So I
Yep.
said to people in the training, don't forget that orangutan thing. And when people are seeing it, they're triggered. People are in trauma. And we take our deep breathing and stuff because a lot of this, I think, genuinely, like I said, we said it backstage in that people genuinely, some people really don't know.
Yeah.
Some people like
Absolutely.
going along. I mean, you're benefiting from a system, right? And who built the Americas? So people aren't aware of it. So you're just going along thinking everybody's good. I have some white godsons, beautiful young men, but they have an idea because they have black friends and everything is good, that is by proximity, that they're not going to have biases. And that's an error, because,
Absolutely.
you know, I love this conversation. Now, listen, we're going to move on because I want to know something about this book. What made you write this book? Do you mind if I read a little bit about, there was a
Please.
write up in front of it there that I
Yeah,
thought was
please,
really
please.
great. So here it is. Your book, D.S. Brown, Why I Voted for President Barack Hussein Obama II. Why did I vote for President Barack Hussein Obama II? It wasn't because he knew how to read well and sounded eloquent on the stage. Though this was a very proud change from the last 8 years, it wasn't because he had written two books. Though this too was something to be proud of, his words in Audacity of Hope truly resonated with me. I didn't vote for him because of his ethnicity or how he was perceived by the pop life crowd. I voted for Barack Obama in 2008 because I read his platform and found it to be in common with his book and his words, which were, well, truly very eloquent. However, as an aspiring critical thinker, I follow no party or ideology without reservation. My vote must be earned again and again and again for every vote I consider. I love that.
Thank you. Thank you.
Really great. So, what inspired you to do a book?
Well, I'll tell you, at work, I've been, what do we call it? It's called a diversity champion, right? And that was back as some diversity councils were starting in corporate America before they added the inclusion and equity piece. But it was a great part of my life in terms of crossing cultural divides and really getting my mind and the mental spaces beyond where I'd already gotten comfortable because you know I had already vacillated back and forth in ideology party and all that crap. And you mentioned bootstraps, right? And I'd read Ayn Rand in school, and we won't go into all of that. But it took me to volunteer to realize that you can't force a child to pick themselves up by their bootstraps when they don't know what a bootstrap is or a boot, where to go to find one. If they found it, they don't know how to put it on and lace up.
That's
And all
right.
of those things inform my opinions in terms of how I would engage other ethnicities. So I became a diversity champion at work. And as we were going through the election, after he was elected, my boss, who happens to be a 6'2", who happened to be a 6'2" white guy from Alabama, Southern Alabama, one of those other states that you talk about. And he turned out actually to be one of the best mentors I ever had.
Really.
And he did more for people of color in that company than some black people. Let me tell you, as an
Mhm.
executive,
Mhm.
he was a really great dude for me. And we kind of had a bet that, or a statement. He said, "Well, Derek, if he wins, what you going to do?" So I'm going to do a Jefferson strut all the way through the building because I was on one side of the building in my office, and his was all the way on the back end. And I told him I would do the George Jefferson strut if Obama won, and he did. So it was comedic. I strutted all week through the building doing this. George Jefferson out of the Jeffersons, and
Yes.
I was doing that all week, and I was making folks laugh. We had over 40 folks working for us, and we leaned
Mm.
into discomfort and diversity. And you had different ethnicities in our space, and they saw us. Whereas other folks back then were told not to talk about politics, we did. So we continued those conversations over the next years of Barack's presidency. And one of the other diversity champions, a white lady who ran the council, and I'd already written a book at that point. The next election was coming up. She looked at me and she said, we've got an author in our midst who would probably write a good book about the president. Don't y'all think he should write it? And I was right I looked, I was like, yeah, that's a good idea. Who you talking about? And she looked at me and said, I'm talking about you. I went, oh, really? Write a book about President Barack Obama? Well,
Mm,
and we were off to the races.
wow.
And
Very
that was
nice.
good. Yeah.
So you obviously love to write. How many books do you have? I was looking at it. Was what how many you have?
It's 12 now. And clearly, I've been told that they're fairly decent, but, also a lot of it is part of if it's your core thing and it's a marketing campaign, we'll see
Yeah,
where we go. I just love writing. I'm not
so you do it.
necessarily a book salesman. So, but yeah, I've got another one coming out. Actually, it's going to
Mm,
come out in about another week or so. It's the smallest book, shortest book I've ever written, but it's also tied to a NFT. So I'd love to share that with you folks. I think it might be something that's intriguing. Folks might say God doesn't necessarily have a place in science fiction. And I would say it's not for or against for me to tell. It's for me to
okay.
share a story and allow you to think. So
Okay.
that's
Okay.
what's coming
You could
next.
learn a lot from those. So
Yes.
why are you such a policy, political, like, whoa, you that guy? Where did that
Yeah.
all come from?
Well, that's kind of funny, right? I'm not necessarily I wasn't raised in a highly charged political environment, but it comes from the stuff we've already talked about, Sandra. Eh, eh, the folks like to say politics doesn't belong at work, it doesn't belong in every space.
Mm,
And I love, from my perspective, I call it educating. And I tell people, I did it recently with folks who are actually serving in government. I'm like, no, you're saying the wrong thing. And they're like, what are you talking about? Like, politics is in everything that we do.
yes.
Politics is a function of how we manage the spaces in which we live,
Mm,
how we govern, what we can and can't do, what do we punish, what do we award, and who gets money. That's everything that we do. So
yes.
you can't talk about going to work and, well, we don't bring politics into the workspace. Yes, you do. Yes, you do. The contracts that you engage in, how you engage with each other,
Hmm,
depending upon your ideologically and with whom you identify, your behavior may shift. It may cause you to stop thinking critically. And what does that mean from a corporate perspective? That means you might not work well with your teammates. That is something that I can actually quantify because you're dealing with that BS. That means you erode the efficiency of your team. And that means you're not going to be that innovative. That means it's going to take you longer to solve the problem, deliver the product, deliver the software, install it in production. And if you're not doing any of that, then you're eating at my company's bottom line. That's politics through and
mm,
through. And I need you to get that. I need you to get that because if you can get that and engage in that in an appropriate manner, then you'll be a better employee. And we'll all be better together. So let's start with that. Let's understand that. That's what got me engaged in politics. I started thinking about it critically and I said, well, if I'm going to do anything about it, I will. You know,
you got me
let's
going on the show because I'm listening to some of these. You got the politicians up on the podcast, and I started to think, oh my gosh, and what you just said, it permeates everything.
everything. Everything.
It
I don't like
permeates,
taxes. I can't stand them, but
yeah.
I like good streets in front of my house.
Yes, absolutely,
I like a
absolutely.
stoplight that runs. You know,
Wow, 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 wow. And what about the podcasts? What
so
kind of a
uh,
vehicle is that for you?
a friend, it's a vehicle for what we just discussed. A friend of mine, right before Trump was up for re-election, told me, just the way I talk and whatnot and what I write about. He said, "You should do a podcast." I said, "No, I have time for that. That's not my bag." He said, "This is your bag. You like talking about this stuff. Well, you like writing about it. You can talk about it too. It's just a little bit of time." So I said, "A little bit of time." And I'd done a couple of videos with some friends too. So the next thing you know, it came from left field, and it wasn't necessarily my gig, but he threw together some music for me, came up with
Wow.
some iconography,
Mhm.
and the next thing I know, I got a podcast, and it's fun. It's fun. It's fun. It's challenging, but it also feeds something for me because if anyone listens to it, an always aspiring critical thinker, I want
Yes.
to make people think, and I want them to ask questions of the people around them, and most importantly, themselves.
Right.
And in terms of how we govern, I think it's critically important that when I'm pushing on the podcast is that you always question. The one I just recorded, a guy who was running for office and he didn't qualify, so he's not running again. But he's a Democrat, and he was running
Mhm.
against another Democrat. And he wasn't necessarily doing it to say, I don't like this guy. But it's about what I say in the book, Barack
Mm,
Hussein Obama, why I voted for him.
mm,
It's because I looked at his platform and I read it, because as we know, reading is fundamental. I read
mm,
it. I identified with it. It was right for me, my wife, my daughter, my family, my community,
mm,
my city, my state, my nation. And that's the calculus. That's what I think every individual needs to do. And if you're not, if you can't, then get with someone who will help you with it. I'm not going to say don't vote, even though once upon a time I did feel like that. Everybody should exercise the franchise. It's
mhm,
that important.
mhm,
But you need
mhm,
to understand why you're voting, and it's not a popularity contest. And every time someone runs for office, hold them accountable. I took Barack Hussein Obama's first term and compared it to what he said he was going to do for a second. And of course, I look back at what he said he was going to do, and it all aligned. There was no question who I was going to vote for.
mm,
And that was it. I had a good friend who told me, well, Derek, I was just wondering, did you vote for him because he's black? Because, this other guy did. This other guy that we worked with was a senior level director, and he didn't care who he told. He said, I voted for Barack because he's black. Damn it. It's like, exclamation point and emphasis. And, Derek, you did too? Nope. If he messed up, I'd vote him out. Well, what do you mean? I said, well, it takes work. I read his platform. I read his book. That was really one of the first great things. Like I said, what was in the book was in his platform. I'm like, wow, this is logically make sense.
mm,
He's probably going to catch hell trying to do this, but let's see what happens. And in my field, I actually told my VP this when she was saying, she was relaying what this black director had said. He's like, I can't, I don't think I can get behind him because of the things he did. I said, like what? She didn't necessarily know, right? Because
mhm,
he was still glommed onto the popularity contest. But I told her, do you know who Vivek Kundra is? She said, no. I said, this is the czar for information technology for the entire administration. He was not necessarily that popular. Want to know why? Considering how you Republicans think, he cut costs aggressively. Folks lost their jobs because they were
mm,
lazy in spending your tax dollars. He found efficiencies and he put a dashboard out for the public to see, an IT dashboard to show federal government spending on information technology. It was
mhm,
awesome. And it was the right thing to do. And our eyes got big. He did that. I said, yeah, you like that, don't you? It's the kind of thing
mm,
that conservatives always seem to talk about. Now, I know you may feel some kind of way that the black guy did it or that the Democrat did it, but if we can get past that stuff, these are the common grounds.
mm,
These are the things between us. This is where if we can just put our ideology on the shelf, we can go, we both want this. So let's make sure that the person pushing
mm,
back gets in office. That's where we have to be.
mm. I'm going to add something, and I want to hear what you think about this. Um, we're going to turn the page for a second. I'm really curious in terms of how we were classified at the bottom of the rung, classification by Rohan Blumenbach, Carl von Linnaeus, Darwin theory, throwing a bit of that, and we were at the bottom. See our Europeans at the top, and our American Indians, Asians, and we were right here at the bottom. So when you think of the dehumanization, I look at black men and I look at our relationships. You're blessed to have we have a lot of great marriages still, not the amount we would like, but I think of the dehumanization of our black men and the positioning of our men and women and our families and how that was terribly disrupted. And I think about there was a term in 1995. Of course, this goes way back. It was happening after emancipation. Droves of black men being taken off the street for rape. That wasn't even the MO of the black man, but that was happening nonetheless. And when I think of the term super predator under Clinton's administration, trumped up a lot of support. These super predators, hawks and lions that are going about raping people and killing people. And a guy from Princeton U, and I ask everybody this because I really want our audience to know that your take on it. A guy from Princeton U made this prediction: tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of black men specifically, and indigenous, but mostly black men, were taken off the street and they were super predators. Well, he apologized. This professor, he did this whole paper and this prediction, and he apologized because it was not true. It didn't end up being true. The numbers weren't there. But I always say to people, there's apologies and I'm sorry's, and people are repenting. But that poison is still in the time warp. It's still here today. We they still think of our men as super predators. There's that movie in the early 1900s, The World's Gotta Know. I repeated it as much times, and it was perpetuated as history. It was a silent film, and here we are. And the scene in this film, of course, they had black men, a turkey, white men in blackface, because we didn't get the roles like that, right? And you have this white man in blackface eating a turkey, and it's supposed to, he's looking angry and grimacing. And there's a white woman sitting on someplace enjoying the sun, frolicking in the day breeze. And out comes a black man,
Hmm.
and with he's in white man in blackface, and he's coming towards her, coming to get her. And then she runs to a cliff and she throws herself over. And the commentary was she'd rather go to her demise than to be raped by a black man. And at the end, this black man is taken off to get hung by the Ku Klux Klan. So it elevates the Ku Klux Klan, and this is Birth of a Nation. And I think about all of these things that is in the time where 17, 18, 19, 20, 21. And critically, when people are looking and thinking that they know something about the black man, that they can look at a black man and say, oh, yeah, they belong. Yet people actually, as I see it, don't realize how subliminally seduced they have been for hundreds of years. And so as a black man, do you have a son as well, or
I just have a daughter.
that's good, the daughters are great. but
Yeah, yeah.
but when you think about something like that, and how that, if people are really looking at this critically, because it's not knowing anymore is almost like it's not a thing anymore.
Mhm.
We kind of have to, you know I think people need to get the 3FE, because if we are really looking and making conclusions about our own bias, because a woman came online with me once for a virtual tea, and she was like, I was offended that you said we all have biases. And my attitude was, look,
We
if
do.
whether you were born, or you came through a womb, or via a petri dish, somebody passed something to you.
Yep.
And you're right. Right. So I was just kind of thinking, how, in terms of perpetuating this sort of thing, how would critical thinking apply to the other when they're looking at this? What do you think about that?
No, it's real simple. It's real simple. The first thing you would do is you would stop. You would stop and you would think. That's always take a beat.
Hmm.
Take a beat. In the heat of the moment, take a beat. When you're not in the heat of the moment, take a beat. When your first assumption is to say he is, think about some grace. Give a person some grace and listen before you speak.
Hmm.
Listen before you speak. And I would say this to the other person on your show. We all have biases. We all do. See, the challenge, Sandra, is that there are facts and there are opinions.
Yes. Yes.
And opinions are easier than facts. And the filters of opinions allow us to turn facts into things that are palatable. We can scale them. But then, of course, they're no longer facts. There's no such thing as alternative facts.
Mm.
The fact that we all have biases is a true thing. There's a Harvard test out there that you can, and it showed, I think it was 60 Minutes years ago, the little video, you can Google it, where the black kids are looking at the black doll.
Oh, yeah, the doll test. We use
And
it a
the
lot.
black
We
doll
use
is
it all the
the
time.
bad one.
Yes, it's crazy, right? Where did that come
That's
from?
bias in action, real,
Yes, absolutely.
recorded for all time. I
Yes.
have biases.
Hmm.
Chris Rock did a whole comedy skit
Mm.
about black people versus niggas.
Absolutely.
He did the whole thing.
And this guy, Dr. David R. Williams out of Harvard, did this amazing. He's got all these stats on this whole thing. It's a lot of people doing this right now, and it's true. It's a thing. I love that. Stop. Take a beat.
And be and
Yeah.
think and
Yeah.
think. And by the way, and I will apologize if some folks felt offended as they listened to my use of the N word, but I use it in the manner in which it must be used. It carries a
Absolutely.
lot of heat and it makes your stomach sink a little bit.
Yes. Yes.
And
It
I
does.
use it
It
as it
does.
was used on me for that very purpose. I just wanted
Yes.
to make sure I added that out.
Yes, yes. And I really want to I want to thank our listeners, because there's people here that really support what you and I are both doing. There's a group on Facebook, what's it called? White people doing something. We got can't white people doing something, and white people against racism, and there's another one, Canadians against racism. It's really great. There's some things that are going on out here. But leaning in, you had mentioned that. I say it too sometimes. Lean into the discomfort. If you're uneasy, imagine how
Right.
internalized, oppressed a people, not just us, our indigenous brothers and sisters.
That's
I have a
right.
lady coming on from India, just talking about in the south of India how women and families, because they're darker, are
That's
dehumanized.
right.
This is a
Yes.
big thing, right? And another lady from China, Japan. There's people coming on, and just to talk to us about what's their double consciousness, and them having a difficult time having to find this sense of self, of oneness, because they've had to, you know, always feel like they have to vacillate and please the other and go through this kind of bias that's in our system. We have a lot of issues in Canada, and I find that people think we're all good. But when I coach in this whole lens as well, anti-bias, anti-oppression, and I'll tell you, Derek, what's going on in the corporate world, you know, it's incredible. People hide
Yes.
behind semantics and all of this other stuff, right?
They
And
do. They
yeah,
do.
yeah. And it's underneath, it's underpinned into a structure of white supremacy. And that's the reality. And our children, do it for our kids, everybody.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I love how you say that because the underpinnings, the structural foundation, the things that we look at and they look at people who are of a European descent and say that it's not real. You know, it's fascinating to watch people of color attend a Republican convention and find themselves sitting next to a Klansman who's not wearing a robe, but
Yeah.
because of their mindset, they identify and find common cause with a couple of core things like anti-abortion, things of that nature. But all of that is wrapped up in biases that are preconceived but old and staid, and they buttress the foundations of white supremacy. It's
Mm,
interesting to watch the white guy do it. It's interesting to watch the black guy do it. But what's
absolutely.
most interesting is when they're
Absolutely.
doing it together and they're both poor.
Yeah.
Are they both struggling in some means or some way?
Hmm.
They don't know our history and they don't know that the entire thing, the function that they're driving, was born of some smart folks who were trying to start businesses that said, if we let these poor folks get together and act right, they're going to run us. We can't have that.
Mm,
I say it simply because the American export that is racism started from that conversation. That happened
mm,
somewhere, perhaps in the offices of the East India Company. I don't know.
mhm,
But it
mhm,
happened. And the
mm.
result is something that we feel globally. And
Yes.
I want folks to understand, Canada has a reputation, but you're like, we catching it up here. You're saying it, saying we're catching it all over the world. Don't you
Mhm,
folks know?
mhm,
Don't you know
mhm.
the racism that you can feel here in Georgia, you can feel in Singapore, you can feel in Moscow, you can feel
Clearly.
at the border between Ukraine
Oh, yeah.
and Poland.
Yeah,
Just to make
absolutely.
it clear, please don't lose sight of that fact.
Mm. What would you like to leave with our listeners?
I would leave folks with just one thing in specific, and it comes from what we've been talking about, the foundation of why I do what I do and what I push, and that's being an aspiring critical thinker. Stop and think and take a beat. Breathe. And
Mm.
if you would do anything that I would give you, use the tool 3FE, find focus, establish a fundamental plan around what you're going to do. And when the plan is ready, pull the trigger on it and execute. And for some of you, maybe that just means execute on a plan, go to lunch with someone that you thought might be so diametrically opposed to how you think that you consider them other. But if they walk on 2 feet and have arms and nose and a mouth, well, that probably means you're a human being. That
Wow.
means they're just like you. Give it a shot.
So how can they get a hold of 3FE?
So they can go to meetdsbrown.com.
So I'm going
That's
to get
the
all your links
website.
so that when we push it out, that it'll
Yeah,
be in the description.
yeah.
Meet sort just in case. Meet what?
Uh, Meet BS Brown. I'm actually putting it in the
Yeah, put it in the chat.
there you
Thank
go.
you.
If they go to that
Good.
website, I've got a bookshelf there. All my
meetdsbrown.com.
books are listed.
meetdsbrown.com. If you guys want to check that out right away, go ahead.
That's right.
meetdsbrown.com. Meetdsbrown.com.
And we've got the podcast. I think folks would love to get a
Oh, so
better
yeah, I'll
read.
put all that Yeah, you're gonna send it to me anyway. I'll have you send it to me, and
Yes,
then
I
I can just
will.
link it up
Yes,
and
I
we'll kick
will.
it out. This has
Yes.
been a pleasure.
Pleasure's
I
been
know
all
you
mine,
are a
Sandra.
busy man, but you make time for us at Voices of Humanity. Good stuff. Everybody stay tuned. We'll be back in a second.
Hi there, I'm Sandra McKechnie from Double Consciousness. Double Consciousness looks like this: cultural sensitivity, cultural awareness trainings. I've been doing it for 4 years. We're going into our 5th year, our 41st time on Zoom, and we're doing it. Would love you to join us. The next thing that I do is I'm a certified life coach holding space for clients in the areas of cultural awareness and sensitivity, right? So people that may have a challenge and they just want some space, a consultation, coaching opportunity to unpack implicit racial bias. Everybody's welcome, and we would love to have you in the trainings or book a consultation. And we have a free opportunity, 15 minutes, if you want to have a chat and get to know me and find out where you fit in that. The next thing that I do is I am a host for Voices of Humanity out of prconnectionsradio.com. If you want to be on my podcast and you're a fit, because it does have to fit with the show, has to complement the show and the network, I would love you to get in touch with me. And I'm also, from my heart, and I've always been a singer-songwriter, and I love this stuff. I love the singing. We put it in our trainings, our cultural sensitivity and awareness trainings. So sometimes I just sing just like this. You're all that I want. You are all that I need. And you brought me here when I can't find my way. You're all that I need. And you brought me here to pray. You should hear that with my keyboard player. It's to live for. Thank you so much for your time. I hope that helps you to know who Sandra McKechnie is. Take care. Bye for now.
Wonderful, 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 wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us. It was great. It was really good. Good for you to be here. Remember, this is fueled by double consciousness, 2 streams of thought, 2 social identities. There are trainings that I do. I also coach in that area, and I look forward to spending time with you again. We're going to have amazing guests on. And so, Derek, thank you. Thank you for being you and sharing with us. And I will get you all of Derek's information, Derek Brown, and he's insightful, critical thinking. I'm going to put it to practice. I hope you do too. Remember, it's not your fault, but together we can do something about it. Take care.